Hello, bonjour, namaste. Welcome to the Canada and India show, where we meet the people that make up the vibrant Canada-India relationship. Every week, we interview leaders in their fields to dive into who they are and what drives them. From the arts, to trade, to human rights, we will discover together how rich and diverse this relationship really is.
Hi, I'm Annie Dubé, Canada's Consul General in Mumbai, India, and you are listening to the Canada in India show. In today's discussion, we dive deep into the world of NGOs with Neera Nundy. She's an Indo-Canadian from Whitby, Ontario. In 1999, she co-founded Dasra, which is catalyzing India's strategic philanthropy movement to transform 1 billion lives with dignity and equity. It was founded on the simple premise that supporting nonprofits in their growth will scale their impact on the vulnerable lives they serve. Join me as she takes us on her journey from Wall Street to heading an NGO and how she wants to impact the world. Today we're speaking with Neera Nundy. She co-founded Dasra, and I'm very excited to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, in fact, we're in your office space, and it's quite a cool building.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we just moved here about a year ago, and finally 110 of us are under one roof, whereas before we were in 4 different buildings scattered around. So we're quite excited to be together here.
Wow.
Yes.
Dasra has been created in 1999, I understand.
Yeah.
And it's 20 years this year.
Yes.
Fantastic. Congratulations.
Yes, it feels like a long time, and yet it doesn't. So it's sometimes a little bit embarrassing because you're like, you've been here 20 years. And then if you ask people, they're like, aren't you 2 years old, 5 years old, 10 years old? I'm like, no, we're 20 years old.
Can you explain what Dasra is and what Dasra does?
Sure. So Dasra is a nonprofit. It's a Sanskrit word that means enlightened giving. And my husband and I started it like 20 years ago. But it was with a simple idea because we didn't actually come with a whole lot of skills ourselves because we started when we were 24 as little analysts in Morgan Stanley in New York is where we actually both met. And we just thought if we could do something a little bit more meaningful, what could that be? And just at that age, neither did we have money nor a whole lot of skills. And so we thought if you can help a nonprofit, whether helping them raise money or helping them improve from the management side, then maybe this organization would be able to grow and then they would have an impact. And so a bit of influence, I think, situated in investment banking as an analyst and then, creating something like Dasra. So we're an intermediary, so we're in between where the nonprofits are on one side that are having the impact on the ground and supporting them with management and funding. And then we realized very quickly without money and resources, you can give all the advice you want, but it actually needs to be funded. And so how do you educate philanthropists? And with New Wealth in India, we felt, is there a way to influence them to be more strategic in their giving? And so now there's really 2 sides to what we do, but there's a lot that goes behind educating philanthropists and a lot that goes behind supporting nonprofits.
So you're Indo-Canadian and you decided to come back to India to run a Dasra. When was that you came back in India?
So my husband came first. So technically he founded it and I followed because I probably got enlightened a bit later. I studied in Canada and then went to the US and joined investment banking. And then I actually got into Harvard Business School. And Dave, my husband, came and started Dasra. I went to business school because I was like, oh my goodness, I got in. I better go. And then after business school, I went to UBS Warburg to pay off some of my loans. And I think at that point, realized, just with the privilege of education and exposure, that if I came and, supported on something like Dasra, even if it didn't work out, somebody would hire me. So it was very basic as I didn't have a whole lot to lose. Could I do something a bit more with the exposure that I'd had? And so then I came and joined and now we are where we are.
How many NGOs do you work with right now?
So we end up working with hundreds, actually, because we have a leadership program that's called Dasra Social Impact. And in each of these cohorts, we're now in cohort 6. So we've been running for 6 years. And we do it in partnership with Harvard Business School. And they come in for an entire year through 4 modules. Each of these cohorts have about 60 leaders. And then we run an accelerator program, which has another sort of 60, 70 leaders in there that helps them with their business plan, helps them think about next 3 years, and helps them communicate and pitch what their organization is trying to achieve. And so within that, we have about 120. And then one-on-one, we support with funding and more customized management capacity building, we call it. That's probably another 40, so almost about 200 in a given year.
Wow.
Fairly intense. And then through our research reports, we end up doing quite a lot of due diligence and assessments. And so each of our research reports, whether it's like domestic violence or anti-sex trafficking or child marriage, we end up funneling between 700 to 800 organizations all the way down to what we believe are the top 10 to 15 high potential organizations. Because, in India, we have something like 3 to 4 million nonprofits. So to navigate that space in and of itself is actually very challenging. And so to highlight the potential organizations and then match that with funding is a lot of where we've also situated ourselves.
So I really like your approach that you bring in terms of business mindset to run NGOs so that you create more impact. Have you been able to measure the impact you've had over the years?
So we have. I think it's been difficult to do that, especially because we're one step removed. But I think now at the heart of what we're doing are placing what the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, just as a framework globally. And now India having adopted it, also put funding, the government taking this quite seriously. We've also modified our own approach to say at the core of everything we do must be an outcome, a measurable outcome. So our work in 10 to 19, it's an adolescence collaborative that works with girls and boys that are aged 10 to 19. At the heart of that, we're measuring child marriage, so delaying the age of marriage, delaying the age of first pregnancy, helping girls complete grade 10, and then measuring aspects of agency. It's a collaborative platform that is navigating around these particular outcomes. And so being much more measured about it, I think is important for the sector, but you have to build that capability. So it's not about Dasra's capability only, it's about who we're funding and the work on the ground. And so being able to build that is a lot of what we're also doing.
So you mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals. How do you decide which ones do you want to work with? And I wonder how you identify them and then you bring them to the next level. So can you expand on that?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of, for lack of a better word, opportunity, right? So we can push for some of these goals. So for example, we have another collaborative in democracy and governance. And we very much push towards the goal of access to justice, which is, I think, Sustainable Development Goal number 16. And it's for us to having realized there's a gap in this particular area. And so let's push towards a gap area, or you push towards where is their funding going, right? Like urban sanitation with Swachh Bharat and a big government movement towards that, them pushing corporates. Is it really going to be effective? And can we play a role there? So I think it's a bit of follow money to make it more effective or drive money to where there are gaps. And I think, very much gender is at the heart of a lot of our development issues, that if we can solve around that, and that covers a whole range of these development goals. The problem is they're not all mutually exclusive, right? So they're interrelated, interconnected. And so I think between gender, urban sanitation, and access to justice, these are at our core. But, it's more and more exciting as you see other collaborative platforms, for example, in nutrition maybe, or climate. These may be areas that are linked to the SDGs that we might support, but we wouldn't drive those outcomes particularly ourselves.
So you mentioned gender being one of the important components that you're looking at and that you want to support. Why is it so important for you?
So I think there's two aspects to it. One is, I think for some of us, it's personal. And I'm sure even for yourself, you see, in our own lifetime, how much we've seen is needed to kind of drive different agendas to have a balanced and diverse view. I think engaging women and girls at different levels of society will just make a better place. But at the heart of the development agenda really is women and girls in terms of they will become mothers, they will manage the family, they will raise the next generation of girls and boys, that a lot of the mindset, nutrition, a lot of health and education and rights-based work, if you can provide that kind of access and empowerment. And we're saying, do it at the age of 10 to 19. We're not even saying, it's not only about women, it's actually about young girls and young boys. as part of this empowerment process, how do you engage them, I think is at the core of us moving the needle definitely in India on the development agenda. I think our biggest challenge in India is the cultural context, the patriarchy, the deep mindset that, inhibits women and girls themselves, but also the gatekeepers and the boys and men around them. And with this growing movement of investing in gender, I mean, that's nothing new, right? We've seen the feminist movement obviously excel and accelerate. But I think what we're now seeing is the importance of how do you deal with backlash? How do you deal with not having invested in men and boys as part of this empowerment journey? And so some of the feminist movement doesn't believe that one should be investing in boys and girls, actually, that can sway us away from the agenda. But I think now there's a growing understanding and slowly moving money into, engaging men and boys, community leaders, in addition to holding girls' outcomes and women outcomes. I think we do need to deal with that because you can give all the agency you want to a girl or a woman. But even if she has choice, she has a lot of constraints around her that if you don't unleash that or you don't align that, then what's the point of all this agency, basically?
I think you're touching on a very important point. Personally, I try to raise my son as a feminist as well. And so we'll see how it turns out.
I have 3. So I console myself that they will also be feminists. Let's hope.
Do you find that there's more needs or equal needs between rural and urban areas?
I think there's a growing challenge in the urban context because of the potential lack of family support. So when you migrate or you come to a city and you're both working. And so it's important in India that we don't brush across. There's different classes, there's different economic status. So if we're speaking about vulnerable communities from, poorer groups, it's a very different life for them than it is for middle class, than it is for upper middle class. And yet there are things that sort of cut across. So the challenge we have in India is that working as you move down in economic status, women have to work for bringing income into the family. And that is looked down upon as you move up in status. So the tragic thing to some extent for us in India is that women not participating is seen as a higher status. And if you think about some statistics out there, there's something like 70% of IIM Ahmedabad, which is, a well-known management institute, of women actually don't work, because it's looked down upon. But the challenge now becomes, if women do decide to work, then what's the care economy around them to be able to support them? And this is not just a problem in India. This is a problem kind of worldwide, is where do you place your kids? Even if I speak personally, when my son was born in 2005, there were very few daycares to be able to place him in. And it was frowned upon because why would you have them not be in your home? Usually there's an extended family to be able to support. So I think there's a lot of challenges for women to be in the workforce, yet it is at the core of part of our women's empowerment movement across the board. But the reason I say the urban challenge exists is you don't have the same support network and infrastructure that you have in rural, where it feels safer. Usually you're in a community with a village, you'll have a family member be able to take care of. Although at the same time, one of the biggest reasons girls are held back in school is actually to take care of their siblings. So there is a general issue around care, whether it's for the elderly or whether it's for young, that deeply affects women across the board. There is a real need for women to be in positions of power and influence, whether it's on the leadership side, whether it's on just earning for yourself, right? To have financial independence is an extremely important aspect of women's empowerment. And I would say that cuts across. And then on top of that, you have issues of patriarchy and mindset, and that play against us as you gain in education and in wealth. So there's this opposite thing happening in India that concerns me. And I'd speak, I guess, to that on the higher end of the wealth scale, if for lack of a better word. But I think the importance of the growing middle class, where you're going to get a big bulge in India, and you're going to have women who are educated, who are migrating and need to work, are we going to create the right infrastructure, safe spaces, mobility for women who are alone and independent, and in this middle class kind of group beginning to build their own wealth?
You mentioned patriarchy and the mindset that goes with it and the impact it has on capacity for women to work. How do we start changing mindset? Because we cannot just wait for generations from other generations. How do we address it?
So I think all the stakeholders, and if I simplify that in our world, we think of sort of civil society, the government, and the private sector. I think these three pillars of our society need to be equally engaged in what, we, at least at Dasra, say changing the narrative. And so a really important part is, what is the mainstream narrative right now? And it might be different in different parts of India. But I think engaging civil society, engaging corporates in the private sector, and as well as the government, what can each of them in their space do towards being able to address these issues? There's a lot of constructs and infrastructure and policy changes, I think, that can ignite some of this. There's support structures that are needed at a community level, and there are support structures in the corporate sector. How do we address the issues that women face as they begin to move into the workforce? And can each of these stakeholders begin to support some of that? I think is important. I think as women, we don't speak enough to our own challenges and, come with solutions. As a group, as a collective, I think, having been and often felt as a minority to some extent, I think you don't realize that others are probably facing the same challenge, and that if you were a little more open and honest with the challenge, rather than feeling you have to mainstream, I think that will help to highlight that, to begin to change the narrative, and I guess as a collective really drive for that change and support.
Is there one person or one NGO that affected you most in terms of how you are looking at the work you do, and it gives you a reason every day to get up and keep doing?
So I think it's a journey. It's not, one particular thing. But I think the journey potentially began when I actually read this book, A Price of a Dream by David Bornstein. And this was the time, I guess it was 98, 99, when microfinance began to emerge as a really powerful tool in terms of forming self-help groups. The Grameen Foundation was doing so well. And basically, if you put money in the hands of women, you really had social change in these communities. And it was a combination of kind of finance and grassroots work. And my mother moved back to India from Canada in 92 to start a school for tribal children. Just outside of the Indian Institute of Technology in Kharagpur, which is where she is an alumni and one of the first women electrical engineers to graduate from there. So she went back to start this school, and I'd go back in my summers to just teach English because I didn't know how to do anything else really at that age. And so I think some exposure to having seen real village Adivasis and the challenges they face in access to education, something very basic. And at the same time, having been at Morgan Stanley in investment banking with finance, I was like, wow, this self-help group is my calling. And I went to Seva, an organization in Ahmedabad, which has one of the largest women's worker unions. Hundreds and thousands of women that are part of, a kind of a microfinance infrastructure. And I thought, I wanted to be really close to these women that I was inspired by. So I spoke Hindi. I grew up in Canada, but my mother was very strict in terms of you must learn your mother tongue. And as much as I hated it then, it was extremely valuable because I thought, I can speak the language. I think I culturally understand. Let me be as deep in the community as possible and feel so inspired by these women. But community mobilization was not my skill. And you would see that other frontline workers were much better at bringing women together. And it wasn't about language. It was about association. It was about being a community mobilizer. And I think that's when I reflected that although you feel very inspired to be deeply set in the community, that is not where, my impact could be really unleashed. And that's when I realized actually situating yourself in between this and being able to support the NGO is probably a better use of my skills. And so being a bridge to that and recognizing that it's not always about what inspires you as an individual, but where can you really have and magnify your impact, I think took a bit of reflection for me to say, there are other people better at this. And so I think placing yourself to understand where can you really have an impact for me has been a journey. But that being said, there is nothing more fulfilling than when you see the impact of the work on whether it's women in the community or whether it's NGO leaders growing their organization. I mean, that's what helps me stay motivated.
Any advice you would have for anyone who wants to come and change the world, starting with India?
Come. There's lots to do. I think it's a long haul. It takes a lot of patience, but I think it's extremely rewarding because you see the contrast with how people live in this country every day. And so even little things, little gestures can go a long way. So yeah, the more the merrier.
So we can always connect with you at Dasra and
Yes.
try our luck with making a difference every day.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciated the chat, and I thought it was quite inspiring to see the impact you have on India. So thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Don't miss next week's episode where we discuss with Michael Green, founder and principal architect at MGA, based in Vancouver. He was recently in Mumbai to attend a design conference. He agreed to talk to us about his passion for wood as the main ingredient in the construction business and how it positively impacts the environment. In Canada, we're used to wood construction, but how high can it go?
We are thrilled that you shared this time with us today. We'd love to hear from you. Connect with us on our social media channels. On Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, we are at Canada in India. You can listen to all our episodes wherever you get your podcasts, so please do subscribe. Thank you. Merci. Dhanyavad.